In 1788, John Adams came home to a land which in many ways was strange to him. His years abroad had put him out of touch with American ways and American politics. Adams sensed that the survival of his young nation depended on walking a tightrope between its former ally, France, and its former enemy, Great Britain. That delicate balance was to be threatened by the outbreak of the French Revolution.
I cannot believe my eyes.
Well, this is your new home, Mrs. Adams. The Borland House. The mansion of our dreams.
But it's so small and in such a state of disrepair. Why, it's like a little wren's house. This is not an auspicious homecoming, Mr. Adams. I trust you will not find the United States government so shrunken when you confront it.
I told you, Abigail, I want nothing more to do with government or statesmanship again. Now look at it, Abby, as it will be. The room has good proportions. The architecture has dignity and balance. It will be fine.
I'm afraid the realities compare poorly with my memories when abroad. A sickness for home clouds the mind's eye.
Yes, but at least we are home.
Back in America and reunited with our sons.
Careful, boys. Charlie! Oh, good gracious. Did you hear the birds singing along the road from Boston? You can keep your French nightingales and your English larks. I'll take the sweet screech of a Massachusetts blue jay any day. Oh, serenity, Abigail, is all I crave. I shall serve only the cause of peace and quiet.
Seclusion here in Quincy may be your preference, Father, and I'm convinced it's to Governor Hancock's liking as well. He's afraid of your political experience.
Where do you want this box, Father?
Oh, be careful, Thomas. They're my books. Put them safely in that corner, please.
If that were my fine English bone china, your father would not be so concerned, Tommy.
For a man fearful of me, Johnny, Governor Hancock was extraordinarily hospitable to your mother and me when we landed in Boston.
Of course. He would be kind to you, Father. He wants your support, not your rivalry.
Well, I'm not of a mind to be anyone's rival, Thomas.
Father, you know it's a certainty that General Washington will be president. The prize everyone's fighting for is the vice presidency.
Time enough to talk politics over tea, boys.
Hancock in Massachusetts, John Jay, George Clinton in New York. Heaven knows how many Southerners.
Well, if New York's chosen as the capital, it may boost Clinton's chances. Or John Jay's.
In my opinion, the key figure is Alexander Hamilton. He's the power behind the Union.
A great economist. And I understand an even greater intriguer.
He would not have so much power were it not General Washington's protege, Father.
I think it's unseemly for a man such as Washington to have such confidence in an upstart who's not even in the government.
An upstart or no, Hamilton can pull strings and will, Father, for the candidate of his choice. Rumor has it he's backing Hancock.
If you could get his support, Father, there'd be no question of your election.
Well, give me time to catch my breath, Charles. I've given no thought to seeking any office. And I certainly have not considered soliciting the aid of Mr. Hamilton.
From all that I have heard, General Knox, Mr. Adams is both stubborn and he is vain. He will be less pliable for being stubborn, but more vulnerable for being vain.
He is a true patriot, Mr. Hamilton, much respected. You can't deny that.
He's irreproachable, sir. And I always doubt irreproachable politicians.
Now, there is Hancock, but he's mighty ambitious.
They're all ambitious. So am I, and so are you. We took each other's measure in the war, friend Knox. We understand each other very well.
Come, Colonel Hamilton. Shall you support John Adams?
A plain man who has tarried so long in rich company may have developed notions of grandeur. To be vice president is a little too close. A little too close, friend Knox.
You've no reason to suppose he'd interfere with any of your programs. He knows as well as you do that we need a sound currency. And besides, he's a man of wide experience. He negotiated with both the French and English.
I'd have preferred a man with less experience. Men with a long way to climb are usually more amenable to assistance on the way up.
Who are the alternatives, then?
Oh, there are always alternatives. Most governments are run by alternatives. Except, of course, when someone is indispensable. But let us take the measure of Mr. Adams. Go to him, friend Knox. Sound out his ambitions.
Oh, boys, be careful with your mother's furniture.
You see, just look at the condition of the furniture. It's all chipped and scarred. We never should have tried to bring it across the ocean.
I don't care if we have to sit on the floor. It is the greatest feeling in the world to be in our own home again, in our own country at last.
Where shall I set it, ma'am?
Oh, anywhere. Oh, here, on this packing case.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Here is a warming letter from Benjamin Rush. He says, I have laid the world and posterity under great obligations and hopes I will become the vice president. Mr. Stiles writes in the same vein from Yale. Mr. Arthur Lee, who it seems is greatly opposed to federal government, also hopes I will be elected. Now, that's surprising, isn't it?
It doesn't surprise me.
Well, I've been away for 10 years. I didn't expect it. I'm not even sure I want it.
I shall oppose it with all my strength if it interferes with getting this house in order.
Shall I consider it, Abigail?
You've considered it ever since the Union was conceived.
I've been away for so long. There are wheels within wheels that I do not understand. New factions and loyalties that I'm not aware of. Should I seriously consider it?
Oh. You enigma of the ages. Have a bun.
You are to be envied. Far from the noise and crush of the city. New York's impossible. You wade knee-deep through mud, assailed by smells and footpads. Oh, and the pretensions of what passes for society. After London.
I think I would enjoy New York. We would be near our daughter and our grandchildren. Besides, General, here in Braintree, I have to compete with all the cows for my husband's attentions.
General Knox, you're concerned, are you not, about my political intentions?
Of course, I am concerned. We're all concerned. You have a great following. And rightly so. The name of Adams stands high among our countrymen.
Thank you, sir, but you're concerned...
Let me be blunt. In my opinion, you deserve the highest honor, the worthiest tribute to the service you have done this nation. To be vice president is to be little more than a figurehead. It's to be second best, at most, an alternative.
I consider it no indignity to take second place to Washington.
You should take second place to no man, sir. You deserve the best.
May I be blunt, General? There has been talk, a great deal of talk from many quarters. I have paid little heed to it. If it will reassure you, I shall not seek office. If, on the other hand, the people in their goodness should offer me the vice presidency...
You would not refuse it?
Well, the will of the people, sir, is supreme. I would consider it a signal discourtesy to the nation if I refused. No, I was not worried. I was secure, whatever the outcome.
But you are happier this way.
Well, perhaps. And perhaps not.
Oh, John. You must allow yourself a little comfort. Even a little pride.
Oh! Yes, that's what this election boiled down to, Abigail. My pride or my serenity. If I had not been elected, it would have wounded my pride, but preserved my serenity. As it turned out, they have destroyed my serenity, but gratified my vanity.
Now that, sir, is chopped logic of the highest order. Admit it. Admit you're pleased.
All right, I confess I am pleased. To be the first Vice President of the United States of America. Whatever that office turns out to be.
And it came about just as you said it must. The people had to seek you out and bring the office to you. It was one thing not to ask for support here in Massachusetts.
Oh, I could never.
It was remarkable that people from as far away as Carolina and Virginia voted for you and not their own men. You are the Vice President, Mr. Adams. And thank God for it.
But I'm still at a disadvantage having been away so long. There are things that I can only sense. The new forces. Men who call themselves anti-federalists. Their faces I don't even recognize.
Charles will be with you. Certainly that is not a new face to you.
And you must join me as soon as possible. I've never been very good alone without you. Your advice is something
Can
that
come by letter just as well. You must admit we've been separated before, and by many more miles.
Yes, but having just moved into this new house, the house of your dreams, there's still so much work to be done. It seems to me I am always leaving you to join me when things are settled.
We are never truly separated, John. You are always a part of my life.
Oh.
And you always will be. And soon you'll be able to see Nabby and her children. When I went to see the new baby, I must admit, I found I quite liked the city. So much activity.
Oh, New York is the center of culture.
And government. And society. We must buy you some new clothes.
What for? I have enough for any purpose. All those suits I had made in Europe.
You must dress to fit the office, Mr. Adams. Men judge the package by the wrapping. Do you remember those many years ago when you went to Philadelphia to the First Continental Congress? Dressed so plainly, so severely.
And the first thing I laid eyes on was Cousin Sam, all fitted out in a new suit, strutting around like a peacock.
Well, now it is your turn to strut a little. No ifs or buts. It shall be done. You may be the vice president, but I am your wife, sir. I shall send you off respectable.
Oh. I know New York is only the temporary capital, but it is the capital of the nation. Is this best the city can afford its vice president? No carpets or curtains? What are we, a nation of bankrupts?
Don't worry about it, Father. It's not important. We can buy our own furniture.
This room is unworthy of the office.
Well, if I'm to be your secretary, I must sit somewhere. Where do you think?
Well, I would suggest there, Charles.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Izzard, how good to see you again. So you are a distinguished senator now.
Indeed. And I brought along two of my comrades. They were most anxious to meet you. Senator William McClay of Pennsylvania.
An honor, sir.
It's a pleasure, Mr. McClay.
And John Langdon, President Pro Tem of the Senate.
My heartiest congratulations, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Langdon. Gentlemen, this is my son, Charles, who's going to serve as my secretary.
You may find us a bit rough and ready after your time with those polished Londoners.
Oh, I have never found Americans to be lacking in good manners, Mr. McClay.
My dear Vice President, let me introduce myself. I am Alexander Hamilton. I had to come at once to meet you.
Well, it is an honor to meet you at long last, Mr. Hamilton.
What a happy day for America to see you as the presiding officer of the Senate.
Not as yet officially, Mr. Hamilton, and we must see to that. Come, gentlemen, let us see if the Senate is as yet seated. It will be my pleasure to present you.
You are most kind, Mr. Langdon. I have looked forward to meeting the young man who worked so hard for our Constitution. I have, of course, read your Federalist papers.
You do me too much honor, sir. Your communications from England were, of course, invaluable to us here.
Thank you.
But so much work remains. I have plans for currency, trade, the solvency of this country.
Yes, as soon as possible, Mr. Hamilton. I am most eager to hear your ideas.
What a glorious moment this must be for you, sir. The Congress's confidence in you is most impressive.
I have only one regret, that Mrs. Adams and my other boys could not be here for the inauguration, and my friend, Mr. Jefferson.
Well, Mr. Jefferson seems happily enough engaged in Paris, cultivating the nobility and extolling the masses.
Mr. Adams, the Senate awaits you.
Oh, my goodness. Charles, will you excuse us? Gentlemen, we must not forget that the eyes of the world are focused upon the United States. That we are to gain the respect of nations who may in the future become our allies, with whom we will sign treaties and trade agreements. We must conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of this august body. I therefore crave your indulgence if I approach this problem first with the question of terms of address for public officials. In other words, the designation of titles.
Oh, what's that? What's he coming to?
Titles. The inauguration of our first president will be shortly upon us. Now, in what manner are we to address him? In what manner is he to be addressed by foreign ambassadors and heads of state? As you know, in monarchies, it is the custom to refer to the ruler as His Majesty.
Oh. It is patently absurd to refer to the President of a republic as His Majesty.
Yes, I am quite aware of that, sir. I am merely enumerating the titles currently in use.
But I have the strongest aversion to all such European distinctions. Now, my conscience would forbid me to call any American Your Majesty, or Your Royal Highness, or Your Royal Majesty.
Would your conscience permit you to call the President Your Elective Majesty, as they do in Poland?
May I suggest most honorable?
Protector of the people's rights.
Mr. McClay.
Gentlemen, are we the same Americans who fought at Lexington and conquered against a tyranny supported by privilege, of which such titles are the abominable symbol?
Americans or not, Mr. McClay, we have to call the President something. Now, do I hear a motion? The chair will entertain a motion. This is ridiculous. Gentlemen, when the Senate receives General Washington, where should he be placed? Should we stand or sit? Mr. Izzard.
As I recall, sir, in Great Britain it is the custom to receive the king seated in the Lords, but standing in the Commons.
That is correct.
They stand in the Commons, sir, because they have no damn chairs to sit on. We have chairs, sir. So for God's sake, sir, let us sit. We are free Americans and need show deference to no man.
These matters may seem tedious and inconsequential, gentlemen, but we must remember that this government will exist for many hundreds of years. We must establish a sound and dignified tradition.
yes, Miss August's body. Am I to be seated beside him, or above him, or below him? Shall I face him, or present my backside?
What a spectacle. Adams talked for 2 hours.
Adams talked for 2 hours on the one vital topic of where the president should be seated.
But Mr. Adams has spent years in the refined company of princes. He recognizes the value of protocol.
Oh, yes. And we vulgar souls in the Senate must try not to disappoint him.
Gentlemen, I must call this assembly to order. General Washington has arrived. Mr. Adams, it is an honor to welcome you, Mr. President. This is a great day for the nation, for all of us. It is all of you who do me too much honor.
You do solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of your ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
A new president for a new nation. Prospects for both seemed bright on the day of the inauguration. But Washington himself recognized that an ocean of difficulties lay ahead. One of the greatest was steering a neutral course between those historic European rivals, Great Britain and France. Each country had its champion in Washington's cabinet. Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton favored the British. He believed the essential interests of Britain and the United States, politically and commercially, were the same. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson favored France. His goal was to cement ties with the French revolutionary government. He disliked and distrusted the British almost as much as he did Hamilton.
Vois donc l'œil.
L'œil.
L'œil. Vois avec bonté.
Don't forget the liaison, Polly. Voir to the foot.
I shall never learn to speak French. It is impossible.
It's the most beautiful language in the world.
You think everything French is the most beautiful.
Look, Patsy, this is buckwheat. You see what improved cultivation does to the seed. It's a valuable source of food for the poor.
Il est tout à fait exquis. Mon papa bien adoré.
Mr. Madison to see you, sir.
Is this an inconvenient time?
James, welcome back. Tell us, what gossip do you bring us from the capital?
Oh, Mr. Madison, what have you brought us for this evening?
Mademoiselle.
Thank you.
And this is for you, Miss Patsy.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Madison.
You spoil my minxes.
I love to get
And now for you, Thomas, news from Paris.
Oh, fine. I can't tell you how good it is to see you again. May I get you some refreshment?
I fear they've drunk too strong a draught of revolution, my friend.
Yes, well.
As Louis and Marie Antoinette have been imprisoned, the king is to be tried. No time is set yet. And poor Madame Lamballe, brutally murdered because she would not take an oath against the monarchy. My God, Thomas, they carried her head about on a pike before the queen's window.
Well, some bloodletting was to be expected. But James, it's bad blood. Poisoned by centuries of false ideas. What a fool Louis was. He had a golden opportunity to sweep away the whole rotten system, and he let it slip through his fingers.
Hamilton will try to use these new developments to discredit you.
Perhaps. But the American people will not stand for Hamilton and the Federalists making our government an imitation of the British. We must have a true Republican government.
And you are the man to give it to us, Mr. Jefferson.
Well, not this presidential election. No one can win against Washington. He must have a second term.
But Vice President Adams is in a weaker spot.
He's my friend, James. And a man of honor.
He is too much under Hamilton's influence. This is a fight. We must use any weapons. Mr. Adams should be unseated.
Washington and Adams were both elected to a second term, which opened in the shadow of a European war. Elements of American political dissension now coalesced into rival national parties. The Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, and the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton.
So now the fools have guillotined their king. The French have gone completely mad.
Total insanity.
Well, that is the kind of insanity our Secretary of State believes in. Citizen Jefferson is with us for another term, I fear.
It should be some gratification that Washington and Adams are safely installed for another 4 years. Did you note this? It is thought that a coalition of European powers will mobilize against the French revolutionary regime.
If they don't crush the rebellion now, it will sweep through all of Europe. It'll be Holland next, then England, then Prussia. I have no faith in the mob, Pickering.
I know it is your fear that they will get power here. That would be the end of your carefully built banking system. The end of investment, the end of commerce.
The end of all prosperity.
Surely with your weight in the cabinet, Mr. Hamilton.
If Mr. Hamilton will listen to the words of what I'm saying...
We can no longer delay, gentlemen. Monsieur Genet has reached Charleston. He will be upon us soon. Do we recognize him officially or do we not?
Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary.
If it were not for France's help, we should not be gathered round this table, free men in a free republic. To withhold the hand of brotherhood in their supreme crisis would be an ignominious betrayal. We must receive Monsieur Genet with the full respect due a minister.
Mr. President.
Mr. Hamilton.
In my opinion, no recognition can be given a government which is empowered solely by the right of violence. The atrocious crimes committed recently under its authority, culminating in the lawless murder of Louis XVI, stamp it as savage and irresponsible.
We have a treaty, sir, and obligations which must be honored. Our duty is to the French nation, not to a cruel and unjust monarch who happened to be in power when a piece of paper was signed.
I have not yet finished, Mr. Jefferson.
Pray, go on, Mr. Hamilton.
Even your old friend, Mr. Adams, refused to receive the representative of this revolutionary regime. A regime which is currently engaged in war against the united powers of Europe. Great Britain, Holland, Prussia, and the Austrian Empire.
Exactly my point. To repudiate the treaty with France puts a dangerous weapon in the hands of England. Oh, I'm most sorry to have interrupted Mr. Hamilton's oration.
When the coalition is victorious, which is inevitable, the monarchy will be restored to the French throne. We must preserve our relations with the legitimate regime. To receive the envoy of the current, temporary, revolutionary government,
would be a political blunder of the most far-reaching kind.
I'm afraid Mr. Hamilton has misunderstood the entitled point of our...
Please listen to me!
Mr. President!
Mrs. Bingham, ma'am.
Mrs. Bingham. My dear, I'm so sorry. I didn't know there had been a bereavement in your family. Do sit down.
I am in mourning for the Queen of France, who was so brutally executed by those ruffians who seized power. I'd hoped to find you likewise.
Well, it was very tragic, but...
My dear Mrs. Adams, ladies in our position must make their loyalties quite plain, and you are the Vice President's lady.
I dislike violence as much as anyone, but after all, we are first and foremost American.
For how long? There's so much unbridled support for those monsters. Do you know that my maid, my personal maid, had the effrontery to appear before me in a Liberty bonnet? One of those caps those terrible women wear in Paris. Thank heavens for Mr. Hamilton. All of us who have property and social position should be down on our knees in gratitude that there's one man with common sense in the government.
There are plenty of men with common sense in the government, including the president and my husband. Frankly, Mrs. Bingham, I have little patience with these theatrical posturings.
Posturing?
Well, my dear, Mrs. Bingham. Good day, ma'am.
Mrs. Bingham has come to call because she is so upset about the execution of Marie Antoinette.
And with reason. It was a brutal and unnecessary act.
I've been trying to convince your wife of the extreme seriousness of our situation, Mr. Adams, but she seems to prefer a flippant attitude. Now I must be on my way. Good afternoon. Support Mr. Hamilton in all he does. Without him, I tremble for this nation.
One would think the French Revolution were being fought here in the streets of Philadelphia. I am weary of hearing about it.
And I am weary of Mr. Alexander Hamilton, the savior of the upper class.
Well, if he is their savior, Thomas, Mr. Jefferson is their scourge.
Two are like boys quarreling over a game of marbles.
Yes, and their differences threaten to tear the fabric of government apart. Jefferson's faction are now calling themselves Republicans. They're setting up an opposition party to Washington and the Federalists, while Mr. Hamilton puts himself about as a defender of commerce and the economy. If I were president...
When you are president.
I shall exile them both to a very small island and let them argue themselves into oblivion.
What has happened, John? Mr. Jefferson was so beguiling in Paris. He had the most expansive mind in the world then.
His rigid politics have imprisoned his mind. He's become quite inflexible and obdurate.
Mr. Jefferson is here, sir. He asked to be received.
Jefferson?
Of course. Please show him in. How odd that he should come just as we were talking of him.
I was hoping for one evening without a political argument.
Is it all right? Am I acceptable? I'm never sure nowadays.
You are always acceptable here.
I bring you refreshment from Monticello.
Such beautiful pears. Look, John.
Oh, he is a wizard with those greenhouses of his.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Secretary. Oh, let's dispense with titles for one evening.
Who in the Senate would believe John Adams ever said that?
Mrs. Adams was reading me just the other day a letter we received from Patsy.
Ah, my fondest turtle dove. Far from the nest now, John.
But happy.
Oh, yes, quite happy. We must be growing old, ma'am, when our infants present us with infants of their own.
Yeah.
The grandchildren can be the greatest joy of all. You'll stay to supper.
If you're sure I am not intruding.
It will be simple fare, not like those feasts we used to have in Paris.
I dream of them still.
Would you care for some barley water?
No.
It's very helpful to the digestion.
No, thank you.
Sit down, Thomas. Oh.
It's odd, isn't isn't it? When old friends attain high office, the friendship becomes stretched and strained. Oh, one wants to be simple and sincere as one used to be, but altered positions put one on stilts, and one talks at a disadvantage.
It isn't high office, it's the design of politics.
You know why I've come.
Yes, to win me over to the support of the French government.
You realize my position has been weakened by the Genet affair. I need your help. Are you persuadable?
No. We cannot afford a war, Mr. Jefferson. And should we support France with the blood of her king still reeking from the guillotine scaffold, we would be drawn into a war with every monarchy in Europe.
The French gave us aid when it seemed we were fighting against impossible odds.
Yes, but when we won, we did not execute Generals Howe and Cornwallis. We did not bind young couples together and roast them alive in the public square. How can you defend the trial of Marie Antoinette? That was an outrage to human decency.
That was the work of a handful of fanatics.
That was the work of a vicious mob. Hamilton is right in his suspicions of the mob.
How can you find Hamilton right in anything?
There is much good sense in what he says, sir. He argues from a moral and a legal position which I admire. There must be laws to prevent anarchy. We cannot allow the wild men of France to jeopardize our newly won security. Hamilton says all that, and he is right.
Will you come, gentlemen? Our meal is served.
Mrs. Adams, I must beg you to excuse me. I see I'm no longer welcome here.
Oh, come now, Thomas. Can we not argue like grown men?
This is not a debate, sir. This is the life of our nation.
I now know I have no recourse but to leave the cabinet.
But I wish we could part with our friendship intact. But I see that is impossible. Politics have severed the bonds between us.
Yes. Ma'am.
John Adams, like the United States, was caught between conflicting forces. The country was buffeted between France and England. Adams between the ideologies of his once dear friend Jefferson and those of the leader of his party, Hamilton. In February 1793, France declared war against Great Britain. Federalist leaders tilted toward America's one-time enemy until November, when the British reinterpreted international law and gave naval commanders power to seize all neutral ships carrying provisions to the French West Indies.
The chair recognizes Mr. Monroe of Virginia.
Gentlemen, England has terrorized our borders, slaughtered our citizens, plundered our settlements. She has sequestered our properties, subjected our ships to seizure and search, and now she casts odium and insult upon our flag. I say there can be no other remedy but war with England!
The voices of the people echo the voices of their leaders. Once again, the populace cries for war against British oppression. Once again, effigies of King George III burn in the streets of American cities.
There's John Adams! to take their insults. We're ready to fight them now.
We'll sink every one of their ships and we'll string up every one of their soldiers.
We want war! Return to your homes.
He's a friend of the king.
You serve no purpose by these riotous demonstrations. The government is well aware of the situation and will make the best decision in due time.
We won't wait for the government. We want war now! He's in the pay of the British. Always has been.
Yes.
That's right. I helped write the declaration that gave you your independence. Now return to your homes. Wait until President Washington makes his decision.
Will it be war? Will it be war?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Harry. The post arrived.
No, sir, not yet.
I was hoping to hear from Mrs. Adams. No letters, huh?
No, sir, but there is someone waiting to see you in the parlor.
Hmm? Who is it? Johnny. Oh, my dear Johnny. Oh, what a wonderful surprise. When did you get here? You sent no word.
Oh, I came on an impulse, Father.
Well, you look tired. Is your practice overworking you? Well, what news of your mother? Have you been to visit her?
She's in great fettle, running the farm like an admiral from the flagship. Her rheumatism pains still bother her, but your absence bothers her much more, Father.
Oh, my dear boy, there is no purgatory on earth like being a bachelor. Marry at all costs. A house without a woman is like a desert. I come home to empty rooms and evenings that never end.
But you go out, you dine with all the fine folks in town.
Well, Vanity Fair has no pleasures for me without your mother. Did you come through New York? Did you see Charles or Nabby?
Yes, they both send their love. They're in good health and happy. But the city has gone mad with war fever. The Jeffersonians rattle their sabers and the mobs call out day and night against Hamilton.
Yes, as they do here. My name also echoes in the streets.
How does the Congress react to all this, Father?
The opposing factions threaten to bring us to the brink of disaster. Jefferson's followers think to punish the British with this new non-intercourse bill. They would suspend all trade and diplomatic relations with Great Britain until we have been compensated for the ships and cargoes that they seized, and until our neutrality has been recognized for good.
Do you feel the bill will pass in the Senate, Father?
Well, if it does, it will certainly mean another war with England that could end all we have accomplished. The planning and building of the nation. Oh, God knows the British have given us cause.
Cause is enough for a war?
Well, many think so. I feel for the sufferers, but war would mean an even greater burden. Hamilton is right in some respects. We are unprepared and ill-equipped for battle. We have no standing army, no navy, and no allies to come to our assistance.
Father, what will you do?
Well, I have little voice, Johnny. I am merely the vice president. The most insignificant job ever conceived by the mind of man. I sit and preside over the Senate and watch our nation move into its greatest peril, unable to intervene. I mustn't sound like Cassandra. Now, why have you come so suddenly?
I needed advice, but it seems now rather unimportant.
Nothing is unimportant where you are concerned. Are you in debt?
No.
You in trouble?
Father, we can talk tomorrow. You've got too much on your mind now.
Come now, come. You tell me what's troubling you.
How to begin? I'm 26, and yet I make no progress. I seem unable to get ahead. I plod.
I'm diligent, but nothing of importance seems to come my way. I don't seem able to impress the clients at the courts. I don't blame anyone, Father. It's something in me that's wanting. I'm sure of it.
I doubt that.
Well, what then? I'm well grounded in my profession, but the prizes all seem to go to the others. Even Charles, with that easy charm of his. I don't begrudge him, Father. I set out to be a thoroughbred, and I'm hopelessly a cart horse.
Oh.
I feel ashamed to tell you this.
Now, in whom should you confide if not in me? Johnny, I know something of the world, and I have few illusions. Now, men are fools for the most part. Greedy, vain, ambitious, and frightened. You don't need much to win them over. You have to cut a figure for them, that's all. You should dress more elegantly. Go out more. You are handsome and you have good manners. Go to balls and dinners. Take some part in local politics. Make speeches. Put on a show for them. And you will be surprised how eager they will be to take you at your own evaluation.
I lack the confidence for all of that. And the patience.
At 26. I'm more than twice your age. And I'm still trying.
But you've had a great career. You could be president if you set your mind to it.
Oh, that takes thoroughbreds. There are only 2 in the nation. And they have both gone mad. But let me tell you something. Cart horses have their purpose, too. Those in favor of this bill? Aye. Those opposed? Nay. The tally?
It appears to be evenly divided, sir. Are you certain? 13 in favor, 13 against.
Gentlemen, the vote is tied. As you know, in such circumstances, the President of the Senate is allowed a deciding vote. I have made no secret of the fact that from the first, I favored negotiation with England rather than war. I therefore cast my vote against this non-intercourse bill.
Then it has been decided Chief Justice Jay will head a mission to London. Let us hope that, with God's help, he will achieve a just and honorable treaty.
The merchant.
Actually, I think that was it. Mr. Adams, I've not had the chance to tell you how I've come to rely on your judgment on many occasions. This cabinet has not always been marked by its unity.
Mr. President, only you could have held this cabinet together.
It's a pity that e pluribus unum seems not to be the favorite motto of certain gentlemen. There's another matter on which I would be grateful for your advice. I have been making inquiries about a relative of yours.
Oh?
Mr. John Quincy Adams. Oh, I have had excellent reports. It seems that his legal briefs are models of lucidity.
Well, I think I can say that he is gifted and conscientious. But why, sir?
It has occurred to me that we need someone with the right diplomatic background to represent us at The Hague. Would you be in favor of such an appointment?
Mr. President.
May I assume you would give it your endorsement?
If you will not think me guilty of nepotism.
Send him to me, will you?
Yes, sir.
You are fortunate to be blessed with sons.
More tea, Dr. Thompson. I can't tell you how grateful we are for news of our friends in Boston.
And they for news of you and Mr. Adams.
Mr. Otis, what makes you think President Washington won't run for a third term?
At his age, I understand he's eager for retirement.
Yeah, well, we're all eager for retirement.
But somehow we don't retire.
The elections of '96 are upon us, Mr. Adams. One can't believe that either Jefferson or Hamilton intend to stay out of government long.
Well, certainly not Jefferson. Mr. Hamilton may choose to conduct his party from behind the scenes.
If either of them should be elected when President Washington's term expires, it would lead to endless, dangerous disputes, and perhaps worse.
It might well lead to the end of union. We shall need a leader who has proved himself to be above party politics, who can unify the country.
You have considered the presidency?
I've considered many things, Mr. Otis, including passing my remaining days at peace with my wife, my books, and my farming.
I'm glad for once you put us in the right order.
In my opinion, and in the opinion of many of my friends, you, sir, are the obvious choice.
There can be no obvious choice for the presidency, but I do appreciate your confidence.
Will you not give us some assurance?
When President Washington makes his intentions known, I will make my intentions known.
Just look at that sunset. The clouds are like flaming banners.
Well, it has happened. By some twist of fate, they have elected me their president. I'm no longer young. I do not know if I am of a temper to serve the nation properly in such an office, Mrs. Adams.
We belong to this land, and we must serve it as best we can. You have never shirked your duty, Mr. Adams. Whether it be tedium or triumph.
It is a great relief to me, Mr. McHenry, to know that my friends will not desert me or their country now that Mr. Adams is formally elected, even though some of them may be asked to stay on in his cabinet.
You may depend upon me, Mr. Hamilton. I intend to remain in the cabinet if requested, as do Pickering and Walcott.
Splendid. Mr. Adams will need your help in this new crisis with France.
As we may continue to need your help, sir. We could never have performed so creditably during the final years of General Washington's administration had we not known that we could turn to you for advice.
I realized the president was in ill health. The public service had become too much for him. I was glad of the opportunity to serve both him and the country. If I was forced to serve anonymously, it was a small price to pay.
Should similar situations arise during the course of Mr. Adams' administration, might you be willing to so serve again?
Indeed. But care must be taken. Mr. Adams no longer considers me his friend. He will not look with favor upon any advice that comes from me.
Nor upon any member of his cabinet who seeks that advice.
However, should the Secretaries of State and War feel that I can be of help, Mr. Adams has inherited a hornet's nest, and we are caught between the British and the French.
We know our enemy, the French.
However much may I agree with you, Mr. McHenry, we can afford war with no one. We have neither army nor navy. For the time being, we must defend our honor against the French insults with a firm stand and skillful negotiations.
And the aid of Alexander Hamilton.
If that should be the case, I am your servant, Mr. McHenry. Yours. And the country's.
You do solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
March 1797. John Adams became the second president of the United States. But with the high office came great problems. The political opposition led by Vice President Thomas Jefferson, and the difficulty of maintaining a neutral stance towards both France and England.
If Mr. Adams can be induced to relinquish his bias toward an English constitution, it may be for the public good to come to an understanding with him. At least he was the one sure barrier against the election of Mr. Hamilton.
It is a sad comment on the state of the country that Mr. Adams should have been elected by such a small majority. Nonetheless, had Mr. Jefferson won the presidency, it would have been sufficient reason for dissolving the Union.
From an habitual attention to the Constitution, satisfaction in its administration, and delight in its effects upon the peace, order, prosperity, and happiness of the nation, I have acquired an habitual attachment to it and a veneration for it. Can anything more than mere ornament and decoration be added to this by robes and diamonds? Can anything be more respectable than the authority that springs afresh from the hearts and judgments of an honest and enlightened people? And may that being who is supreme over all continue his blessings upon this nation and its government, and give it all possible success and duration, consistent with the ends of his providence.
Well, sir, I am fairly out, and you are fairly in. See which of us will be happiest.
And so, your father became president with a minimum of ceremony, just as you wished.
You should have been there too, Mother.
No, we thought better of it. None of the other wives were present. And it seemed awkward for me to live in rented lodgings, just hanging on until the Washingtons departed. Now Mr. Adams can settle into the presidential mansion, and I'll come following after.
I wanted to be there, and might have been if things had been different, if our finances had been better. Business matters have not improved with Colonel Smith.
Then he's showing himself to be a true Adams, my dear. The Adams family has not yet learned the subtleties of commerce.
Well, at least you'll make your own grand entrance into Philadelphia.
Oh, no, your father was most particular about that. I'm to come as quickly as possible and hang the cost and inconvenience, but I'm to come demurely. He made a point of telling me to remove that Quincy coat of arms I had put on my coach. It's to be, totally obliterated.
Oh, dear.
Mr. Adams was most urgent in his last letter. He says he has a violent cough, he's worn out, and in need of my advice. Well, I long to be with him as much as he has need of me.
1 month into my administration, and Abigail, they still speak of me with affection. One of the Baltimore papers called me an old fielder. An old fielder, my dear, is a tough, hardy, laborious little horse that works very hard and lives upon very little. Very useful to his master at small expense. Well, dear friend, let us see what they will think of me and the troubles that lie ahead. The coming months do not have an air of tranquility about them. In the newly arisen troubles with France, I do not believe I have the full confidence of my cabinet. Only Charles Lee seems completely behind me. Secretary Pickering spouts fire whenever he speaks.
The French have seized our ships in the West Indies. They've slammed the door in our faces when we tried to talk with them. And they threw our envoy, General Pinckney, off French soil. In my opinion, sir, there is no alternative left, none at all, but war.
Well spoken, Mr. Pickering.
Now, just a minute, gentlemen.
The recent revolution in France was a travesty.
They change their governments like we change our clothes. Now it's this new, the Directory. 5 ignorant men trying to govern France. Men like that only understand a fight.
We cannot leap to arms without giving the French government a fair chance.
But had I been allowed the time to express it, that would have been my opinion, Mr. Lee. We will send another mission to France.
And let ourselves be ground into the dust? Humiliated and insulted by a nation of wine drinkers.
Negotiation is only one aspect of my plan, Mr. Pickering. We parley, but at the same time, we arm. Now, that is my decision. America cannot always be the cat's paw of England and France. I plan to recommend the following measures to the Congress. Immediate creation of a strong navy. An increase in the army, artillery, and cavalry.
Hear, hear. Your opinion cannot help but be our own, Mr. President.
I called you here, Thomas, because I need to consult with you. The nation has placed us in harness together. Now let us try to pull in the same direction.
I'm sorry I grew heated. But as you know, the French cause is very dear to me, Mr. President.
There's no need for this formality between us. Let us begin by calling each other by our Christian names, as we used to do.
In those days, John, we agreed with one another, politically and philosophically.
But our goals were simpler then. When we sat together here in Philadelphia and made a revolution, it was your words that helped form this nation.
And your stubbornness and honesty. I shall attempt to work with you as best I can.
Thank you. Now, about this mission that I want to send to Paris. Pinckney must remain, of course. Now, who else do you suggest?
Send one more Federalist. And a good, staunch anti-Federalist to balance the barrel.
Yes, that's sensible. What is your view of Elbridge Gerry?
I trust the man's intelligence.
Fine, I shall appoint him then. Now, about the preparations for our defense.
You should consult our finest military mind for that. Mr. Alexander Hamilton the Great.
I will not have this feud between the two of you, sir.
I am trying to show you Hamilton's true nature. He's the largest danger we face.
I cannot defend the man's morals nor his overwhelming ambition. But I know he sees the world for what it is. And Hamilton and I are much more in accord about this nation's future than you and I shall ever be.
Oh, by God, sir, he supports the aristocracy. He has no liking for the people.
Nor on occasion do I. Men have always been led by selfish motives. Though they sometimes disguise them under high-sounding names, as your French in power are now doing. The Directory is nothing more than a dummy government, nothing more than Napoleon's puppets. As is Talleyrand, they're all his creatures.
As your cabinet are Hamilton's. Sir! Only poor meek Lee is loyal to you. Don't you know that? But you could move now. Ask for resignations. Put together a new cabinet, one devoted to you and to
Mr. Jefferson, you are insolent. You overstep your prerogatives, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I thought we were having an informal discussion.
Within limits, sir. No, sir. I shall keep the cabinet as it is. Washington was convinced of their integrity. That is sufficient for Adams.
Here we are, Mr. Hamilton. I trust these notes on the cabinet meeting will be informative enough. Pickering and Walcott convey their regards. And like me, await your advice. I assume you want us to stand firm for war.
I don't give a fig for war. We can't afford it now. But if after serious negotiations all attempts at peace become impossible, well, you are the Secretary of War. It is your responsibility to see that we have enough money and public support for ships and guns. If we make war, we must do it as a respectable nation should.
Oh, John, let's open the windows and let the good spring air in. Oh, put down those papers and come to the window with me. You see how bright the afternoon sun is? It's spring.
Yes. Oh, Abigail, how I have missed you.
And I you. There were so many delays. First the weather, then your mother's death. I couldn't leave until things were properly arranged. And then I had to have a day with Charlie in New York. You'd be proud of him, John.
Would I?
Oh, he set up a pretty little house, and he and his wife live quite frugally.
Charles? Oh, I doubt that.
It's true, at least for now. And I've done everything I must, and managed to come to you with the spring.
Yes.
I don't know what it is about this afternoon. The weather, these flowers, you. But I feel like a bride again.
Well, we're poor as newlyweds, that's certain. After all these years, Abigail, I should be able to give you something more.
Mr. Adams, you've given me everything.
Ha.
And as for this presidential mansion, give me a few weeks and you'll see what a wife can do. A few more good pieces of furniture, carpets, draperies, and it will be a showpiece. I will make it a center of political conciliation. We shall have these senators and judges and foreign ministers to diplomatic evenings. We'll give them a tasty meal and pleasant conversation, and a dose of hard medicine. We did it in London. We can do it in Philadelphia.
Would you listen to this? My sunshine friend, Mr. Benjamin Franklin Bache, has turned with the tide. When I was elected a little over a year ago, he said it was a time for rejoicing. Now, he calls me a monarchist, the Duke of Braintree.
Oh, John, pay no heed.
Well, I am resigned to being a man increasingly alone. My advisors are strangers, my friends fade away.
How can you say that when we're besieged with invitations? All my free time is spent answering letter after letter. Well, and what's to be done with this?
What?
An invitation to a ball, February 22nd, to celebrate the birth of George Washington.
No, that's impossible. The president cannot attend a function honoring a private citizen. That's improper. No matter how good, no matter great General Washington was, he is no longer in public office.
I'm sure no offense was intended, John.
Perhaps not. I'm not taking this personally. It's the office I'm trying to protect, not myself. Sometimes the boundaries between the two become confused. It Is it my own vanity?
No. This time you are absolutely correct. You must not attend that ball in a secondary capacity. There. Declined. That's that. And now, Mr. Adams, let us have an end to this day and a good night's rest.
No, there's too much work to be done. Yet nothing seems to get accomplished. Not a word from our envoys in France. Until I know how Pinckney and the others have been received, I'm helpless. How do I prepare? Is it for a treaty or a war?
Gentlemen, nothing's happening. My God, it's time to do something. We've been here for months.
Well, Mr. Marshal, we can hardly expect Talleyrand to come here in person and ask for the bribe himself.
Oh, please, monsieur, not a bribe. A douceur. Certain sums to be taken out of the loan we have requested. Why, you understand the customary distribution in diplomatic affairs, eh? A little sweetening, a little oil to lubricate the negotiations.
3 of them. 3 damn emissaries from His Eminence Talleyrand. And each one talks more slyly than the other. It's a wonder they haven't offered us a little cream for our assistance.
Well, gentlemen, are we at home to Monsieur Hautval?
No more of this, Marshal. I say if Talleyrand himself hasn't come to tea, we should turn them all away.
Come now, gentlemen, let us see him. Sergeant, have him in. We must get things moving here.
Show him in.
Messieurs, Monsieur Marshal, Monsieur Guéry, Monsieur Pinckney, at your service. I've come again to make sure that matters are quite clear to you. Monsieur Oettinger and Bellamy tried to be precise, so they speak as bankers.
Oh, we understand quite well, monsieur. The loan, the douceur, all of it. But we have come to Paris, monsieur, to negotiate, to right certain wrongs committed against our shipping.
Actually, we've grown very tired of hints and evasions, monsieur.
Very well. Let me speak exactly then. My government, the Directoire, is in need of assurances of your good faith. Now, you talk of treaties, but you insult our pride and our national honor by spending millions to arm your nation for war.
Millions? Certainly not, sir.
Specific sums do not matter. And you cannot deny you trade with the English.
As a neutral nation, we have that right.
Fine. Let us deal with rights and obligations. Here. These are our firm, unbending conditions for a treaty. Together with those other requirements already discussed with Monsieur Oettinger and Bellamy.
Ah, yes, the loan, the douceur. This is damned unethical.
How much? How much do you expect us to pay for the privilege of speaking with Monsieur de Talleyrand and arranging the treaty?
Oh, I am not sure. I think perhaps 1,200,000 livres.
$250,000? That's highway robbery.
1,200,000 livres in gold. One payment, no note.
This isn't negotiation, sir. This is blackmail, pure and simple.
No, this is protection for your nation. When France wins her war with England, we will be the most powerful nation in the world. We will honor our friends, and we will pound our enemies into the dust. Well, then you will see how little this token is. Then you will pay for a treaty. How you will pay?
The French government has gone mad. First they ask a fortune in bribes, and then they invent a new maritime law.
Knaves and fools. That's all the French can be.
Did you see this, Mr. Pickering? The French government now declares that every ship at sea carrying goods of English manufacture is fair prize, no matter what flag that ship is flying. That makes most of our merchant fleet liable to seizure.
I will not have the United States treated in this manner. We must retaliate.
Agreed, but we cannot declare war at once. We must wait until our commissioners are safely out of Paris.
We are with you, sir. A solid issue, but we might best delay a little.
Never! I propose we end all trade with France at once. And I concur. Moreover, from this point, all American ships are to sail fully armed, ready to defend themselves with honor against any attack.
If we are agreed, gentlemen...
Wait now, we have not consulted everyone. Where is our vice president, Mr. Adams?
Indeed. Where is his well-considered voice?
Mr. Jefferson wishes to absent himself from the government. In short, he is against us. He is too strong a friend of France.
And he has allies among the people. Now, the whole temper of the country has changed. The talk is now all for peace.
Americans arguing the French cause. It's a disgrace. And journalists crying out against our government, against you, Mr. President. Sedition such as that should be suppressed. And what about the 20,000 Frenchmen who live on our shore, sir?
Well, to act against them, we need proof, sir. Legal proofs.
Proofs be damned. They're spies, the whole lot of them. Talleyrand's agents. It's time to show them we have teeth. Well, Mrs. Adams, what startling news have you read in the papers?
Nothing. The usual.
That's Bache's paper, isn't it? What does he have to say about me this time?
Nothing of any interest, John. Don't even bother to read it.
Old, querulous, bald, blind, crippled, toothless Adams. You think that's an apt description?
Johnny, he is your evil angel. Why, here Bates says you arbitrarily declared a war on France without consulting Congress or the people.
I have not declared a war. I wish I could make those new dispatches from Paris public. They would sing a different tune then.
Then why don't you?
Our envoys are still in France. Their lives would be in jeopardy. If I kept Talleyrand's agents anonymous, call them XYZ, I cannot instigate the revelation. Congress must somehow find out about them and demand that I release those dispatches to them.
Well, then, there are enough loyal Federalists to take a well-placed hint.
No, I want the Republicans to make the demand. That way I cannot be accused of inciting public opinion for my own political good. I want the Republicans to make such a hue and cry that I will be forced to make dispatches public. Then, if I am forced to reveal them, I have no choice. I shall make it all public. The whole sordid affair, that demand for $250,000, all the insults that our commissioners and our nation have been forced to endure from those anonymous Messieurs XYZ. Well, I surprise myself. I may have instigated an intrigue.
I never would have dreamed it possible a month ago. But ever since the public release of the XYZ affair, the country's turned round once more. They all want war again, Republicans and Federalists alike.
The issue has always been to show the world that we're a nation to be reckoned with. And for that, we need a navy. And our army, our wretched little army, must be shaped into a respectable unit. I've done research. Look at this. I know the proper uniforms, the best colors. I even know the most efficient marching pace to be used.
The last cabinet meeting made things very clear. The Army's primary. Mr. Adams is about to appoint Washington commander.
It'll be a second in the command. The caretaker in the field who will be crucial, Pickering. Who has Adams suggested?
He's left the choice to Washington. The general's deliberating between Knox, Pinckney, and you, of course.
Can we influence him?
The general's already leaning towards you, sir. But I'll bombard the old man with letters of advice. You'll get your position, Mr. Hamilton. You can rely on me.
The evening's young yet, Pickering.
To General Alexander Hamilton, brave commander, honored leader, future President of the United States of America. Did you hear that cheering?
Well, I heard some loud noise.
It was for me. I've become the people's man once more. Yet I must admit, I liked the admiration of the crowd. I thought it wouldn't matter to me. But when those students cheered me just now, or when the journalists praised me, I find that I am very pleased.
Down vanity.
Yes.
Oh, John, look at you. You're exhausted. Up past midnight working every night. I could not bear it if you should become ill again.
Oh, I'm all right. The only thing that both of us need is a ramble in the Quincy woods. No state business pressing on my mind. Every time an act of Congress passes that desk, that new Sedition Act. It's true, I signed it to protect the nation. Was I right? To speak out sensibly against the government, even against the president, is a citizen's right. Where is the line between sedition and free speech? Who defines it? I have devoted my life to the law and liberty. Now am I turning around and becoming a despot? Worse than a monarch, because the people put me here.
Never. You were a Democrat and a patriot. And the nation's lucky to have a solid old countryman like you.